is Brittany Stump, and I'm the volunteer coordinator for the foster grandparent program of Northern Utah here at Weaver Human Services. In this slideshow, we are going to go over the different stages of reading vocabulary. This should be the fourth in the tutorials that you will need to watch before you get started. So, we've already discussed the 5 key skills to literacy development in the ages of kindergarten to 3rd grade. The first 3, which were phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency, and now we are getting to vocabulary. What is vocabulary? Vocabulary is the body of words used in a particular language to make sense of said language. Even before they can understand what is being said, children at a very small age, they've done studies where infants are doing this, pay attention to speech and listen for critical sound changes, and they focus on the rhythm and intonation of language. Each month, they learn new words and discover the rules of language. They also learn that words are used for real purposes. Why is it so important? Well, because vocabulary is central to understanding what we read. Not knowing the meaning of most of the words in a book is going to inhibit comprehension and also retention. Growing a vocabulary is exposure to new words. As readers develop, they encounter new words that are not part of their oral language. A key part of being able to comprehend text is the ability to quickly understand those new words. So in our homes, we typically have a set of vocabulary that we use over and over again with our loved ones, our parents, our children. And if that vocabulary is fairly limited in a certain household, children might have a really hard time grasping the meaning of new words. So it's only through exposure at school and checking for understanding that they develop more of a vocabulary. So here are some of the ways that children learn vocabulary. Exposure. Studies have revealed that the average first grader learns 3,000 to 6,000 new words in a year, just by talking to adults and other children. They absorb new vocabulary through the content that they consume. So listening to stories, music, television, YouTube for this generation, reading and talking about books or anything that they've been watching, and through instruction. Obviously, you're going to get some of that at school. Teaching specific words and concepts and strategies to learn new words. So in my household, we have a pretty large vocabulary, but we have always made a point of checking for understanding. So whenever a new word comes up that it might register to me, I don't think my son's been exposed to this word, I will always ask, do you know what that means? And when they say no, I will explain what that word means, and then I'll check for understanding. So I'll say, what does that word mean? Back to me, and see if he can grasp it in a way that it's going to stay in his little mind. And I did that with my students as well. So there were lots and lots of times, especially in those timed readings that you'll have to do with them, that there would be really big words. And clearly they're throwing that in there to see if children are able to work around those big words in their reading. But I would constantly check, do you understand what that word means? And if they were like, no, then we would take time to give them that vocabulary. Retaining stories is really, really difficult if you have no idea what half the words in that story are. So checking for understanding when you're working with children and vocabulary is really important. Teaching specific words and concepts. These include words critical to the main ideas in a story. They are useful words that children see again and again, and words that are too difficult to read or sound out. So a lot of times when you'll get your little packets that you'll be working on with the kids, you might see up at the top, new vocabulary words, and these will often be bold inside the story. I usually always make a point of going over the vocabulary words first before I have them read anything, so that when that new big word comes up, they understand what it is. And I will make a point of making sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly. so that when they come to that new word, they'll understand how to read it and how it should sound. Repeated exposure to the words. Children need to see a word several times before they know it well enough to comprehend what it means. So very often when you come up with new vocabulary words in these reading packets, you'll notice that it's repeated multiple times. I think the most recent one that my son was reading had to do with government. And so the word government was in his little reading packet over and over and over again. Use pictures to reinforce a concept. Images reveal large amounts of meaning to children and help them understand vocabulary in a concrete way. So for instance, in this picture, we have two children with a dog. Now, most children, by the time you're working with them, are going to understand what a dog is, but they might come across the word dachshund in a story and have no idea what a dachshund is. So it's useful to have pictures. And a lot of times when I was working with children in literacy and we would come across new words, especially if they're words that deal with like animals or something, kids love animals, I would take a moment to show them a picture of that animal from my phone. So if they were reading a story and the word dachshund was in there, I would say it's a type of dog. By the way, here's a picture of what a dachshund looks like. Having that visual cue attached to the new word will help them understand it so much better. So taking a moment to show them pictures is totally fine. These are strategies to learn new words. Context clues. Stop and reread a sentence if there's a new word in it, and pay attention to the words that come before and after an unfamiliar word. So for instance, if you're working with kids that have never had exposure to farm animals, and the word saddle comes up, you might ask them to read the whole sentence. So maybe the whole sentence is, Molly put a saddle on her horse. Now, they may never have come across the word saddle before, but in context to the sentence, they're probably going to figure out, well, it has something to do with a horse. So using those context clues are important for vocabulary retention. And then segmenting. So find smaller words within a larger word, and when possible, break the word into smaller parts. So for instance, the word raincoat. It is self-explanatory, but it's a compound word, raincoat. So you might segment that word, raincoat, and you would deduce from the two compounded words that this is a coat we wear when it's raining outside. So segmenting and taking apart compound words will help. Another word, without, is a compound word, using the words with and out to make a new word, without, meaning you don't have this thing. So segmenting, again, is important when you're dealing with vocabulary. And I even would take the time to explain like what a Latin word might mean. Never ever assume that children aren't able to understand difficult concepts. A lot of times they'll be really intrigued with new ideas. So if I had a word that was in Latin, I might explain that this is a word that means like the sun, like helios. So that's either Latin or Greek, that word means the sun. So giving them that context. So if you have already explained, well, helios means the sun, and another part of that word is tropic, then we would talk about how tropic has to do with plants. So heliotropic. Help them understand. How to support their learning. The best way to help children build vocabulary is through conversing and listening to spoken language. In addition to reading with children, engaging them in wordplay can also help build vocabulary. You can play fun games to help build vocabulary. You can do word sorts. So you'll want to think of a category or a favorite topic, such as animals, transportation, toys, sports, if you're working with boys, or gaming, and invite them to think of as many words as they can to fit into that category. So if we were to be doing something to do with animals, I might say, I am looking for lots of words that have to do with a feline. And feline, kids, means something that is in the cat family. So then they might be like, oh, cheetahs, tigers, lions, that kind of thing. You can do word sheets. You can collect new words and glue them to a sheet of paper. So kids who are very tactile and love art, this is going to really engage them. And I have an example of what that could look like over here, like Wordles. They really like Wordles too. Those are fun. And then you can do writing partners. You can take a pair of kids if you're working with more than one and partner them up and have a child write a story using new words that they've been introduced to that day and read it aloud to you or another child. Or you can ask them to take it home and read to their guardian. And then when you're learning vocabulary, it's often beneficial to go over some of your personal favorite words. So one of the ones that I loved was whimsical. I used that with a pair of little girls that I was working with, and they were like really into princesses and things like that. And so a new word that I introduced to them was whimsical, which the definition is playfully quaint or fanciful, especially in an appealing and amusing way. Example, she had a whimsical sense of humor. So I would introduce a new word to them, and then I would say, now I want you to find as many excuses as you can today to use the word whimsical. And so then I might see them later at recess and they'd be like, oh, Miss Brittany, isn't it such a whimsical day? And they love like trying to sneak those words in there. And the more they use a new word, the more they're going to retain it. So those are just some ideas. As children build vocabulary, they should be successfully able to do the following. They should be able to use context to figure out unknown words. So again, looking at all the rest of the words in the sentence to try to figure out what this new word might possibly mean. They might reread a new word to you to clarify its meaning. So for instance, if they came across the word vocabulary, they might be like, oh, vocabulary, what does that mean? This would be your opportunity to tell them. They're able to recognize consonant blends and long and short vowels. They are able to easily read words that recur in a text. So like, for instance, I was using the example of my son's little reading list, and this particular story had the word government over and over. Children should be able to like grasp that word after they've seen it in a story after 3 or 4 readings. If they're continually struggling over it, that might be a cue that something else is going on there, and you might want to revisit some of these other previous ideas before we get into the vocabulary. They should be able to recognize a large body of sight words, and they should be able to demonstrate knowledge of word meanings. So for instance, if vocabulary was a new word and that came up on Monday, and we went over it again and again through the week, by Thursday, I would like to have my student demonstrate to me that they understand that word by telling me the meaning. And again, we revisit this idea in every slide, but it's so important to remember that even a small amount of progress is progress. So you might come across 10 new vocabulary words. If there's a child who's really struggling and they retain only 1, give them lots of praise for that 1. When they get to 2, even more praise. Because small little incremental improvements are going to help them so much in the long run. So celebrate it as a major achievement for them. And once again, feel free to contact me. I'm Brittany Stump, or Charity Robury. She is the director of our program at any time if you have any questions. And thank you for your time. Have a good day.